Hey everyone, I'm Reginald Galloway, Lieutenant with Vicksburg Fire Department. Today I'm going to be giving you guys a presentation on fire safety and prevention in the home. Alright, I have three main objectives for today. The first one being educating participants on how to avoid fires and fire-related injuries. Alright, then we're going to talk about creating awareness of fire deaths and injuries and their common causes. Last but not least, we're going to talk about informing participants of their personal responsibility toward fire safety and injury prevention. Each year, on average, there are more than 350 residential fires each year in the U.S. Within those 350,000 fires, there are approximately 2,620 civilian deaths each year, along with 11,030 reported civilian injuries and 7.2 billion in property damage each year from residential fires only. This is not talking about all fires, this is strictly residential fires that we're talking about today. All right, we're gonna talk about, like I say, residential fires today. Most people generally feel the safest in their own homes. However, residential properties are where most fires and fire deaths occur. 30% of all structure fires occur in residential properties. 72% of structural fire deaths occur in these properties as well. All right, there are many fire causes. We're going to talk about a few today. Cooking is top of the list with over 50%. Next up, we have heating at 9%. You have unintentional and carelessness is 8%. Electrical issues is 7%. Arson at 5%. Smoking at 3%. There are other type of fire causes as well. These are just a few. These are the main causes. So we're going to talk about those in depth next up. All right, first we're going to talk about cooking fires. When you're cooking, you always want to pay attention to what you're cooking. If you ever leave the room while you're cooking, leave the kitchen while you're cooking, you want to turn off the stove. You don't want to leave it unattended. They can be very dangerous. You also don't want to cook if you're sleeping, if you've been drinking, or you're impaired in any way. If you've been drinking or you're impaired, it may not be your intention, but you can fall asleep. You can you leave the food hanging, and that could be very dangerous. Over half of all home fires originate in the kitchen. So like I say, if you're in the kitchen cooking, you want to pay attention to what you're cooking at all times. Be aware. You never want to leave whatever you're cooking unattended. In order to reduce the chance of a cooking fire, you want to keep any flammable objects away from whatever you're cooking. So that would be objects like curtains, pot holders, towels, and clothing. Most people, they like having pot holders around the stove and towels for decorations, but those things can be fire hazards. So you want to keep them away from the stove in order to limit that chance of a fire in the kitchen. Also, when you're cooking, you don't want to have on long sleeve shirts that's baggy, that's reaching over the flame. That can be very dangerous. You also want to clean your stove top frequently to avoid grease buildup. This as well can be a fire hazard. You have grease all on your stove, and that, with the fire and everything, can cause a fire. You also want to keep your flammable cleaners away from the heat source. Any cleaners that you may have sitting out, you want them far away from the stove while you're cooking. You don't want them anywhere near, because they can be combustible. So like I said, these are a couple of things you can do to reduce the chances of a cooking fire in the kitchen, along with paying close attention to whatever you're cooking at that time. All right, we're going to talk about grease fires. You always want to have the matching lid nearby. Whatever you're cooking and whatever dish you're cooking, you want to have that lid nearby. And that's so if it does happen to catch on fire, you can easily put that lid on to smother that fire. Another thing you can use is baking soda to smother that fire. You never want to put water on a grease fire. Putting that water on it is only going to spread that fire out more, and it's going to make the situation much worse. All right, now we're going to talk about electrical safety. You never want to overload electrical sockets. You always want to not put too much on it that it can handle. They can be very dangerous and can cause a fire. You don't want to run cords under rugs or furniture. These cords can become worn, and that can start a fire as well. You also want to avoid putting cords against walls or under doorways or across doorways. Over time, when that door opening and closing, that cord can become worn and they can be very dangerous. You also want to use power strips equipped with overload protection. And any power strips you use or extension cords, you also want to make sure they're approved by laboratories such as the Underwriters Laboratory. I know a lot of people in the wintertime, they like space heaters, like they use the space heaters, and they'll put these space heaters on extension cords. This is very dangerous. Most of the time, those extension cords are not capable of withstanding that load, that electrical load. So you want to plug it up into an electrical socket that's sufficient enough. And you also want to have that heater in an open space. You don't want that heater close to any curtains or any furniture. You want it in a nice open space to reduce the threat of starting a fire in your home during the wintertime. All right, now we're going to talk about some smoking related fires. Most people don't know, even smokers, they don't know that cigarettes can smolder for hours after being left unattended. Some tips to avoid smoking related fires. Never smoke inside if possible. You also want to discard your materials in a fire safe container, possibly a heavy ashtray which won't tip over easily. Do not improvise. You don't want to just throw it outside in the grass. You don't want to throw it in the trash can that contains paper. You don't want to just put it anywhere. And like I said, it'll smolder for hours and you can easily start a fire. So you want to make sure it's out and you want to dispose of it properly. All right, couple more tips. Never smoke in your bed. And just like cooking, you don't want to smoke while you've been drinking, while you're impaired in any way. If you're on any type of medication that makes you drowsy, you don't want to be smoking. You can easily fall asleep while you're smoking and not know it. And that can set your sheets on fire. It can fall on your floor and set your carpet on fire, any curtains nearby, and you're sleeping, and that can be very dangerous, starting that fire while you're sleeping. So, and another thing that a lot of people don't think about, after a party, it's always a good idea to check indoor and outdoor furniture, cushions for smoldering cigarette burns. You may be aware of fire safety and be very efficient in it, but your guests may not be. So you always want to check after having a guest over to make sure that they don't have any cigarette butts in your furniture, inside or outside of your home. Now we're going to talk about candles. Unattended candles are leading fire cause. It's always a good idea to try to use flameless candles if possible. They're less of a hazard. When you do leave the room with a candle lit, you want to blow out that candle. You never want to leave it in the room unattended. You also want to keep it at least a foot away from anything that can burn, whether it's curtains, paper, anything combustible. You want to have it in an open space, at least a foot away from anything else that can be combustible. Candles can burn. They can start fires once they get down to the base if they're close to anything combustible. Like I said, if you're leaving a room with a candle, you want to make sure that you put it out before you leave that room. You never want to leave these candles unattended. There are many important safety elements when it comes to fire safety. A few of them are alarms. Within these alarms, you have smoke detectors and carbon monoxide detectors. You also have fire extinguishers that most people have in their homes and safety plans. We're going to talk about those in a bit. All right, we're going to start off with smoke alarms. The presence of smoke alarms alone reduces the risk of death by 50%. This is a great reduction in the chance of death. It's always a good idea to have these smoke alarms. Breathing in this smoke is very toxic and it can kill you. If you do have to go through the smoke, you always want to get as low as possible and try to leave the room. All right, we're going to talk about alarm placement and maintenance. Alarms should be on every level in the house and in every sleeping area and outside of the sleeping area. You also want to make sure you can hear the alarm in every place in your home. I know sometimes some people think it may be a nuisance, but that alarm, that can save your life. So if you're in the front of your house and you can't hear it in the back, you want to get one closer to the back, even if it's not in the sleeping area, just so you can hear it well enough throughout the entire house. It also should be loud enough to wake you from your sleep. You want it as loud as possible. That's the best. That's the best it can be. If you're asleep, you want it to wake you up. You also want to check them once a month. You want to change the batteries once a year and get those detectors replaced every 10 years. It's always a good idea to make sure you have them everywhere they need to be. You want to make sure you check them every month and change those batteries, because this can be the difference between life and death. All right, got carbon monoxide alarms. Carbon monoxide, it is an invisible and odorless gas. There is no way to detect it without an alarm. So if you don't have an alarm, you can have a carbon monoxide leak and not even know about it. Some symptoms of carbon monoxide poisoning mimic flu-like symptoms. So you may think you have the flu, but you have carbon monoxide poisoning. If you are feeling these symptoms, you want to immediately move into an open window or go outdoors. If you think by any chance you have a carbon monoxide leak, you don't want to play around with it. You want to take it as serious as possible. Leave the house, call 911 to get somebody to check on it. High levels of carbon monoxide can be fatal, causing death within minutes. If you think by any chance you have a leak, you want to leave the house as soon as possible. You want to call for somebody out to come check on it, but you don't want to sit around in the house, thinking it's nothing. You want to take that very seriously. All right, now we're going to talk about fire extinguishers. Most people have fire extinguishers in their home. You want to have them mounted in an obvious spot or near an exit. Everyone in the house should be familiar with it. You should make sure yourself and your kids are familiar with the fire extinguishers, their placement, and how to use them. You also should be familiar with the mnemonic pads. When you're using the fire extinguisher, you want to pull the pin. You want to aim it at the base of the fire. You want to squeeze the trigger, squeeze it, and aim it in a sweeping motion until the fire is completely extinguished. When in doubt, you always want to get out. If you're unsure about how to use the extinguisher, or you think the fire is too big for the extinguisher, just get out and call 911. You don't want to play around with your life. So if you're in doubt, get out. You also want to be familiar with escape routes. This comes along with the safety plan. Every family should have a safety plan in place for fires. So you should have a designated escape route. You should have at least two. Every family should have 2 escape routes in their home. When the smoke alarm sounds, you may only have seconds or minutes to escape. You also should have a meeting place outside of the home to gather. They could be a mailbox, a utility pole. It could be anything. The end of the road, the end of the driveway. Just have that meeting place for everybody to know where it's at and everybody to go to in the case of an emergency. Like I said, you always want to plan 2 ways out in case smoke is filled one way or smoke or fire. Like I said, if it is smoke in the house, you want to get as low as possible and exit that building and get to that safe place. You should also practice this with your family every so often, just to make sure everybody stays fresh on it and knows their safe place. All right, if you do have a fire and you're not able to put it out with that extinguisher, even if you are able to put it out with that extinguisher, you still want to call 911. But if not, you want to leave, close the door, and call 911 from the outside. You want to report all fires to the fire department, whether it's burning, it's out, whatever. You want to report all fires to the fire department just so they can come out and investigate to make sure it's fully extinguished. You don't want to ignore alarms. Whether you stay in an apartment building, an alarm goes off 20 times in a month. You want to take every alarm serious. You don't want to play around with it. Each alarm could be treated as if it's a real fire. Once you get out, you always want to stay out. That's when having that plan comes in place. You get your family, you guys meet at the mailbox. Everybody knows to stay there. If you don't see somebody at the mailbox, they're probably on their way, or you just hope they're on their way. You don't want to go back in the house looking for them. Everybody go to their meeting place and stay at their meeting place. You also want to notify the fire department if anybody is accounted for. When they get on scene, you want to let them know that, hey, my brother isn't out the house yet. I don't see him. I don't know where he is. Let them go and handle it. You don't try to go and handle it. It can be very dangerous and it can be deadly for you. And he could be out at his buddy's house at the time. So you want to let them know, let them go about their job, but you want to stay at this safe place at all times. Because you never know when it could be a real fire. You always want to protect yourself and protect your family the best way you can. All right, in summary, all right, there are many ways to reduce the risk of fire. One way is staying focused when you're cooking. Like I said earlier, when you're cooking, you want to tend it at all times. If you're leaving out the kitchen, you want to turn off whatever you're cooking. You want to keep lids nearby that match the dishes in case of a fire. Be aware, know where your extinguisher is at all times and knowing how to use it. You also want to use counters responsibly or not at all. You want to keep them, you want to be monitoring the counters at all times. You never want to leave those unattended. If you leave the room with the counter, you want to blow it out before you leave the room. You never want to overload electrical sockets or misuse extension cords. It's a good idea to know how much your extension cords or your power strips can handle prior to using them, because you don't want to overload them. If you must smoke, be responsible for your smoking materials. Make sure your cigarette or whatever you're smoking is completely out when you dispose of it properly. You don't want to dispose of a lit cigarette in the trash can or in grass. You don't want to smoke inside. All right. And if someone is smoking into your home, you want to check to make sure that everything is disposed. Even if it's not you, you want to check for your guests. Like I said, if you have guests over and you think they may have been smoking, when they leave, you want to make sure everything has been disposed of properly, because you don't want to have to worry about any fires igniting after everybody leaves. Like I said, have their fire safety plan and practice it. Make sure everybody in the family is aware of the safety plan, the designated safe place to leave in the event of a fire. And everybody knows the escape routes and how to get there. You want to make sure you practice this multiple times throughout the year. You want to have working smoke alarms and carbon monoxide alarms. This is very vital to your safety. Like we said earlier, over 50 smoke alarms have reduced death by 50%. That's a tremendous amount. So you want to make sure those are working properly. You want to check those batteries. You want to replace them as needed, and you want to be responsible. Practice fire safety and practice good habits. All right, before we wrap up today, I have a few pictures that I want to show you. But before we get to that, does anybody have any questions? All right, if not, we're going to move on. All right, just a couple of don'ts that I want to show you. This fella right here, he's sleeping while he's smoking, and that's a big no-no. You don't want to do that. Those butts could easily fall down on those sheets and catch fire, and that could be a very bad situation. And over here, they have this power strip overloaded with extension cords, extra extension cords. They just have too much on this. This could be very dangerous, and it can become catastrophic. All right. We also have this what we're talking about earlier with the tiles and the pot holders and everything on the stove top while cooking. That's an open flame. If you have that tile near it, that could easily start a fire. And if there's grease in there, it can spread and get very bad. So you want to keep these items away from the stove while you cook. You want to keep all tiles, pot holders, everything away from the stove while you're cooking, because it can be very bad. All right. And over here we have a space heater. Looks like they had it hooked up to an extension cord. Like we said earlier, you want to be mindful of how you use those space heaters in the wintertime. You want to make sure that whatever you're connecting it to it can handle that electrical load. You do not want to connect it to an extension cord. That could be very dangerous. And similar, they caught it early, but that could have been bad if it wasn't being monitored. That could have started a house fire right there. All right. And I just want to finish off by saying thank you